Queer Onda El Paso, episode 17 that we're calling Silver Screen. Join us as we delve into queer cinema and its evolution over the years. Queer visibility plays a vital role in helping audiences better understand the LGBTQ experience. It can also offer an affirmation for many people who long for authentic representations of queer stories in contemporary film. These films often tackle complex themes surrounding love, identity, and societal challenges faced by queer individuals. In this episode, we look at the history of queer representation in film and discuss a few current films that are receiving critical acclaim.
Our guest today is Felipa Solis. In addition to her role as executive director of Pro Musica and her own public relations company, Felipa is a member of the Broadcast Film Critics Association, which is the largest film critics organization in the United States and Canada.
She joins us to talk about queer visibility in cinema and the recent Oscar buzz about the films Emilia Perez, Queer, and the documentary Will and Harper.
Felipa, welcome to Queer Onda El Paso.
Thank you. It's wonderful to join you and to see that you're doing great things. And it's really, really exciting, especially to talk about that which has happened in the arts.
Exactly.
In so many years. And I guess that's the story of my life, is that I grew up in the arts. And my father was a choreographer. My mother, they had a dance company. My father worked in movies. He was born in Spain, spent a lot of time in Mexico. He left Spain during the Spanish Civil War. He was much older than my mother, child of scandal. But okay, but he left during the Spanish Civil War.
Wow.
And was ultimately picked up by Saul Hurok as a dancer. And he traveled all over the world. And his love was Mexico, because Mexico opened its doors and its hearts to 150,000 Spanish expatriates who needed to get out of fascist Spain. And so this was always so incredibly important in my upbringing, that the arts are for everyone and everyone for the arts. And that's why we're here. And so this is where I took off. I loved journalism. I loved to write. I worked for News Channel 9 for many, many years and came back to my roots by coming to El Paso Pro Musica. So it's very, very exciting to be able to work for an organization, a nonprofit like this, that brings the finest musicians in the world to the region with the commitment of reaching young people and making a difference through the power of music, and just making a difference through the power of all of us, because that's the beauty of the arts. We are one, and we are together, and we are each other.
Isn't that the truth? And it's great to talk about the different types of art forms. And I know that you're extremely involved as a film critic. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How did you get involved in that kind of sideline as part of your overall encompassing career of the art? But how did you get involved in becoming a film critic?
Well, what's kind of funny is that, no, it's back to the day. Let's go back to square one. And right now, hoping and praying for the people of Los Angeles, because that's where I was born.
Absolutely.
And when I saw pictures of the flames of Santa Monica Pier and my baby beach and all of this stuff, I just can't get over how something like this can be happening to a place that we used to call home. But that was my thing. My father worked in films for many years, and he loved silent films, which is what I love, because here we go. You dance with the ones who bring you. And silent films were the early ways to express the cinema. Who were those pioneers? From Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton. They were directors and writers, and they edited the film. This is film. There's no AI or anything to work with here to make special effects happen. And so he always talked to me about film and his love of film and who started it all and the Hollywood sign. And it was all such a important part of my life that films were everything. When I was in high school, I was such a nerd. Not only was I a dancer and I loved classical music, but I also used to read screenplays or plays that were Broadway shows that became films. And I always had that. So when I went back to Channel 9 in the late 90s, I started reviewing films. And it was in 2001 that I learned about the Broadcast Film Critics Association, is what it was called then. And I applied and I submitted film reviews that we were already doing on the morning show here on Channel 9, and I got accepted. So I've been a member now 23 years.
Wow.
But it's been so wonderful to be able to, a film critic. There's nothing I dislike more than dislike a movie. I want to love every movie that I see. And there's always something and interests, but it's been a wonderful way to meet a lot of people in the industry. I am fascinated by everyone who has a piece of the action of whether it's directors or writers, actors, who are the nice guys, who are the not nice guys, all of these things. But that's, it was my upbringing that made me have this passion for film and celluloid.
And as part of that journey, you got to go to the Oscars. Is that right?
Well, actually, I've been to Critics' Choice and Golden Globes. That was, I mean, the red carpet experience is the red carpet experience.
Sure.
You can't put a price tag on that. It's unbelievable. And who's in a good mood? Who's not in a good mood? Who really wants to talk to the press? Does everyone want to talk to the press? They're the people who walk up and say that a particular actor is coming down. Do not make eye contact. And yet there are people who will sit and talk to you for hours.
Wow.
One of those people happened to be the late, great Robin Williams.
Oh.
And when you have experiences like that, you appreciate them. One of the films that Robin Williams was most proud of was The Birdcage.
Wow.
And The Birdcage was truly, what an exceptional film. Made in 1996. To this day, I do not understand how that film was not nominated for a single Oscar, but it wasn't. And based on Elaine May and all of these incredible writers, take La Cage aux Folles and turn it into this incredible film that I can watch 1,000 times with Nathan Lane and Robin Williams. And I just, this is cinema at its finest. I remember when Boys in the Band came out in the 1970s and how people were just so, oh, what is this? It's an incredible film that's based on an incredible story.
Right.
It was a Broadway play. And this is how all cinema needs to be viewed. It needs to be embraced. Art is from our heart. And also, it was the great George Brock who said art is meant to disturb as well.
Exactly. And educate or illuminate to some extent as to some of the human experience, certainly.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
But that's a nice segue into what we wanted to talk a little bit about, the history of we'll call it queer representation. For the purposes of this podcast, we've decided that LGBTQIA plus is a mouthful. So we use the all-encompassing word queer. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about queer representation in film and how that might have changed over the periods of movie making.
Well, what's been incredible are films like The Birdcage. There have been films over the years that have addressed issues that are not only very important to the LGBTQIA plus community, but to communities in general. Sean Penn in Milk was such an important film because it was an incredible piece of history that had to be told. People didn't know about the Castro. People didn't know about the fights that went down in a place like San Francisco, where all it was a matter of fighting for human beings' rights. And a film like this, yes, there's always criticisms about who's cast, who's doing what to whom. But again, the story is being told.
Right.
And the story is being told for people to witness and to see and to understand and to reflect on history. And so as we also look at the history of actors in cinema, actors like Montgomery Clift, Rock Hudson. They were silent film stars who had to be closeted because of the Hollywood system, and they couldn't be themselves.
Have you seen the documentary, The Celluloid Closet, by chance?
Yes, I have.
You know, we were talking a little bit about that, and one of the things that really stuck to me when I saw it was they were interviewing a woman who said that whenever she would see a scene that just hinted, just implied that there was some sort of significant relationship between two women, that it was like she was glued to the screen because there was that moment of identification, that moment of feeling like some very small part of her life was being represented on screen. And when all of these closeted actors were kind of have their hands behind their back, and the stories were not as exactly as forthcoming as we would hope, it was what we had to cling on to. And now we live in a world where we're seeing a lot more visibility in movies like The Birdcage, and even from the 90s forward, we're seeing a lot more visibility to where we're at a place where we see things that even break the stereotype, like Brokeback Mountain. Tell me a little bit about what your experience with that movie is.
That movie was absolutely overwhelmingly over the top. It was amazing because it broke a lot of barriers. A lot of criticism came down because they said, oh, well, they were basically two identified as straight actors who were in this film. However, it was an important story to tell.
Right.
And at the time, I remember going to Critics' Choice and there were protesters. And what were they protesting? Art. When Picasso decided to change it up and draw incredible characters and sticks and all that he did. No, you don't protest. That is an expression of self and art. So it was very overwhelming that happened at that time in the early 2000s. But we're hoping that with this year, cinema is taking on a whole new sense and sensibility, and cinema is becoming much more inclusive.
Tell us about another film that maybe hinted to the sorts of the kind of the celluloid closet, where it really wasn't very in your face, but there's stories of love there, or that a little controversy at the time. The Children's Hour comes to mind, and you wanted to talk about that.
Absolutely, film. Because when Lillian Hellman wrote the play, and they did the original film in Hollywood, they changed it up so completely that it was two women fighting over a man.
Right.
When it was redone in 1964 with Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn, who really took a chance because Audrey Hepburn was Breakfast at Tiffany's. That was about a year or two later after she did that film. And she was known for someone so entirely different, as was Shirley MacLaine, with acting and dancing and all that she did. And here she is in a role of two women who open up a very predominantly wealthy all-girls school where two little girls overhear a story, take it to a limit. It was an unforgettable story, an unforgettable film. I had the great pleasure of listening to Shirley MacLaine talk about it because she talked to her agents and she was so attracted to this story. And they said, this could go either way, how this movie is seen and how you will be represented. And she said, this is an incredible story that we will be able to tell the way Lillian Hellman wanted it to be told. And even James Garner, who plays the doctor, who is engaged to Audrey Hepburn and has this doubt about whether this character did have a relationship with a woman or not. And Audrey Hepburn has to just stand up to all of it, her character. And at the time when the film came out, there were many, many cities, many theaters that boycotted the film. They wouldn't show it. And she was very happy to see that Turner Classic Movies, Shirley MacLaine, was embracing the film as a classic, was showing it in their film festival, and how important this screenplay was for the time and for those people who had the courage to go to the movies to see three incredibly successful young actors in a real story.
And I think that story would have been quite different if they had used unknown actresses at the time. I mean, they were using their star power and their visibility to help move our visibility forward. The LGBTQ communities, because it really is storytelling. It wasn't really a political statement. This was a story that Lillian Hellman had been telling since it was a hit on Broadway, and now when it transferred to film, that story got muted, and now this is their second chance to actually tell that story, and that's really kind of what inclusion's all about. Film tells stories,
right?
And part of the stories, not all stories, but part of the stories are LGBTQ oriented. Some of them are lesbian, some of them are gay, some are trans, but they're still just stories. And it's interesting to me how people still get up in arms when people are simply telling stories.
And it's, again, art. Juan Miró, Pablo Picasso, when they stepped out of the norm of doing paintings that were in the classic period, sure, or, that sort of thing, it got people up in arms because it was different and it's telling a different story. But it's so important. Like if you see, you can see a cathedral in one city and then you can see what Gaudí did in Barcelona. Right. It's the same thing. You're expressing yourself and you're expressing yourself for who you are and why you are. And it needs to be accepted because all art's beautiful.
Yeah,
and it shakes up the conversation. That's what art is supposed to do.
Along with the Children's Hour, there was a movie in the early 80s called Making Love. Harry Hamlin and Michael Allen Keaton and Kate Jackson.
Kate Jackson, yes.
And I was young enough to remember what a big deal that movie was and what a controversy it caused. And by today's standards, it's innocuous. There isn't anything in there that is, it's all implied. It's very, very kind of sanitized for your protection.
Absolutely.
But that movie really was another one of those posts that kind of propelled the visibility factor a little bit more in our direction, because even though it probably didn't have a commercial success, certainly it had a lot of press coverage and it got a lot of notoriety.
Yes. And Harry Hamlin was a very young actor who was trying to make it on the Hollywood and television scene. Michael Onkeen was in a television series at the time. And so there was a lot of controversy whether the network should have allowed him to do it or not. And again, I remember when that came out, that film, and it was the talk of the town until it wasn't, because now we've come to a point where it's okay. It's okay to tell stories, which leads to what's going on now. As a critic, I will look at a film based on how the film is telling the story. The 20-minute mark is generally that mark where you're looking at your watch or you're not.
Right.
At 20 minutes, if a film captures you, you're in. And that's kind of how it works. And that's film. I mean, that's Chaplin. That's every film. And so that's what's so interesting about a movie like The Children's Hour, is that establishing this story, and all of a sudden there's this unique twist to it that Lillian Hellman had written, that was directed by William Wyler, who was so well known for doing the things he did and directed the first film in such a different manner. He was telling this story for real. Right. These were the words that Lillian Hellman wrote. And I think that's what's important about art. That which is on the canvas is what it is.
Right. It has a life of its own.
That's right.
So going back to the idea of, you brought up Michael Allen Keaton and Harry Hamlin's positions in Hollywood when they decided to take the role Making Love. There was a period of time where straight actors were said, if you ever play gay, you're never going to work again.
That's correct.
And so a lot of actors would do anything they could to avoid well, first of all, there wasn't a lot of roles to choose from. The ones that did come up were either stereotypical or they were meatier, but people were afraid to play them. And now it's very interesting how the world has changed, because now we have people protesting when a gay role goes to a straight actor. And so this is that progress? Probably. But is it also, I think, a double standard? How do you, I, as a gay man, am not offended when a heterosexual man plays a gay a character, because he's an actor. I mean, he's not a public person pretending to be gay or not gay. It doesn't matter. But as an actor, he's taking on that characterization. How do you feel about that?
It's kind of a double-edged sword, because I feel that representation has to happen. It's like when they did West Side Story and Natalie Wood was Maria.
Right.
How can the story best be told? When we talk about The Birdcage and we go to Robin Williams, but Nathan Lane identifies as gay.
Although he wasn't out at the time.
He wasn't out at the time. So it's very unique how it comes together. Robin Williams was such an incredible artist. I don't think anybody questioned it. I think that Nathan Lane is possibly one of the greatest talents of our time. The way Nathan could sing and dance, and how they incorporated the universe into a drag nightclub that was extraordinarily successful, which is La Cage aux Folles. I mean, this is the story. Do we have to hide who we are to impress their sons' future in-laws? I mean, so it's kind of a story telling a story, which is kind of what happens all the time. There's a film that I've talked to people about, and it's Some Like It Hot, where Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon have to dress as women to save their lives.
Right.
Yes.
I think that movie is fabulous because they're so uncomfortable and they ultimately can embrace themselves as women. And at the very end, the final line in the movie is so fantastic when Jack Lemmon says, "I'm a man." And Joey Brown says, "Well, nobody's perfect."
I know.
And it's just, I think that's where I'm headed. I feel like I don't ever want to judge. So I feel like what the members of the LGBTQI community are comfortable with, that's how we need.
Well, that's true. That kind of the barometer may shift over time.
Certainly.
Certainly there wasn't a lot of controversy that I perceived with Daniel Craig taking on the role that he took on in the movie Queer most recently, and there is Oscar buzz about him. And I didn't see that this time. Did you all perceive that? I didn't see.
Not at all.
Why
Not
did
at
he?
all.
But mostly because it's Daniel Craig. So if you have James Bond wanting to play gay, you're going to let him,
Absolutely.
right? but what do you think about?
Well, I mean, this is what's interesting about that film. What that film is taking place in Mexico City.
Right.
And it's based on the book by William S. Burroughs, and who I think is possibly one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. There's a book that he wrote. I mean, this is off topic, but it's called "And the Hippos Were Boiled in Their Tanks."
Yeah.
And it was written in the 40s. And one chapter is written by him and one chapter is written by Jack Kerouac. I mean, as having been an English major at the University of Texas at El Paso, that book to me was one of the most incredibly well-written books I've ever read, which led me to read a lot more by William S. Burroughs. Queer was semi-autobiographical, again, taking place in Mexico City. Fascinating story about a person who was not identified as queer, but can go to a place where he's comfortable being queer. And Daniel Craig, I don't know if he's going to win the Oscar, but Daniel Craig, as an actor, goes above and beyond the Call of Duty because, not to say believability, but he becomes William S. Burroughs, who had to deal with a lot of his own identity issues, living in the United States, goes to Mexico. He's under fire for a lot of things, but how Daniel Craig takes on William S. Burroughs' role is a phenomenon. He really is overwhelming. Will he win the Oscar? I don't know, because there's a lot happening this year with who's playing whom. But what a role. And I think in not certainly the twilight of his career, because I think maybe he's in his early 50s, maybe.
Yeah, he's certainly not 60 yet. I don't
certainly
think.
not.
No.
But this is going to launch him in a different direction where because everyone who was Bond was Bond. They did a lot of films. Sean Connery ultimately won an Oscar, but he was Bond.
Right.
Yes.
And it's so interesting. I'm going to go back in time a little bit, and I'm sorry if I'm throwing this off. Let's talk about the film Psycho
Okay.
Oh, yes.
by Alfred Hitchcock, that was one of the most frightening films ever made in 1960. And Norman Bates, it comes out at the very end that Norman Bates is queer.
Gay.
Queer.
Yes.
Gay. At the very end. At the end. And it was very interesting how it was taken, because all we were watching in this movie is, where's the $45,000 that she took? He didn't care. He had whatever was going on. But it was very interesting how it was handled in 1960.
Right.
It was just like, oh, and this is the tip of the iceberg at the very, very, very end. It was also an issue for Anthony Perkins in his life.
Right. That's true.
And he was extraordinarily typecast. And it's interesting that his son now, Osgood Perkins, who was named after Tony Perkins' father, is becoming a very prominent director. But it was very interesting when you see Psycho, and you really, because I think probably at the time it got kind of washed away.
Washed away.
Yes.
Right. It became an afterthought.
It was an afterthought. But that's what was happening. This was a very insane person and so on and so forth. But that's what's interesting. And I guess what I'm doing is I'm segueing to Emilia Perez, because I think a lot of the criticism of the film, when I first saw the film, I was blown away. I really was. I thought, whoa, this is incredible. Selena Gomez and her accent didn't bother me, because in essence, she's not playing a person from Mexico. She's not playing a person from Mexico.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. I made that same concession. And also it kind of she speaks Spanish in it with a very American accent.
Yes.
Yes.
See, those of us that are native Spanish speakers can certainly spot that away.
Absolutely.
So they're not trying to fool anybody.
Not at all.
From the get-go, from the casting.
But I know there were a lot of issues with respect to, did they shoot the film in Israel? Did they do this? Did they do that? I know there's always going to be discussion about films like this. But again, it was very interesting, because I thought about Psycho, and I thought about Tony Perkins' character, and I think about Carla Gascon and the character that she's portraying. That, well, we're not seeing a standard life story, but this is a story that was written and it was created by someone, and it's very unique. So I'm very curious with respect to the LGBTQIA community, because I, at first, was not overwhelmed by these things that I read about later.
Right.
And as a film goer, I mean, this film, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association welcomed it with open arms.
Right.
So I was I'm turning around. The guest is asking the hosts, what would you recommend with respect to this film?
I think that one of the things that we have to remember is that I think that very rarely is the transgender experience expressed on film so brutally honestly as it was in Emilia Perez. And I think that's the headline. Everything else are bullet points. And I think that there are some very interesting themes that come up, particularly with what drives these characters. Kind of contrasting the two. Daniel Craig's character in Queer, the transgender person that becomes Emilia Perez. What drives them there, both characters go through such incredible catharsis. And all of these other things, and that's at the center of those films. Everything else is kind of just satellites floating around, and so it's really about those singular characters. And I think that for that, everything else, while I understand people's contentions with certain little nitpicky things like where it was located or where it was actually filmed and who was cast as the loving wife, those to me are not nearly as important as having the story to say this is a good movie. And so that's how I feel. What do you think about that?
I think I agree with you because also this year, for some reason, with all films that I've been seeing, there is something written. Here's the critique that you need to understand. And it's happened with The Brutalist. It's happened with A Complete Unknown. It's happened with a number of films that have come out this year that, oh no, this is the critique that you need to pay attention to. And if you think this, you're wrong. And that's what's been weird to me this year because film is art. It is a story. I was very overwhelmed when I saw the film in a good way.
Right.
But then I became very overwhelmed by what I have read. And then I'm like, well, am I insane? Do I review the film? Will I offend anyone? And this is kind of how I broke away from it. Whereas I didn't have any of those feelings with the film Queer because I'm like, I've read this book.
Right.
Yes.
I know this story. And so maybe that was where there were no misgivings because it was a novel. It wasn't a screenplay.
And you were familiar with the story.
And I'm familiar with the story.
Right.
So my way of looking at it is that I just want to be so fair in my discussion of the film. And so I wasn't disappointed to see it winning the film's awards for the Hollywood Foreign Press Association.
Right.
Yes.
But I would love to see Daniel Craig. Well, Daniel Craig's career is going to skyrocket. But then there's another film this year that we've talked about just very briefly, but that's Will and
Harper, which is a documentary. And it was released in January. And I hope that that the Academy remembers back then, because I mean, it is an exceptional documentary. And we, all three of us, Ceci, who's not with us here today, was our homework after I spoke to you, Felipa, was to watch this film on your recommendation. So all three of us did. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Tell me a little bit about that documentary, what your feelings were about the documentary, Will and Harper.
Well, Will and Harper, it's Will Ferrell, who we all know and love from Saturday Night Live, from all of his films. He is such a wonderful man. I personally love Will Ferrell because he is an incredible dog lover. And that for me is everything. However,
man after our own heart.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Must love dogs. This was an amazing documentary based on the fact that one of his best friends since his early 20s decided that pushing 60 was going to transition. And that they decide to take a road trip around the country and all of their experiences and how basically Will and Harper are dealing with their new identities. Is there a new identity? Are they the same friends as always? Of course. And I thought this journey was exceptional. I feel like there were the documentary awards for a Critics' Choice. And Will and Harper was a big winner. And I really feel like it will indeed be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary because the storytelling was so beautiful. It's two friends. Stuff happens.
It begins. You almost forget it's a documentary at some point.
That's right, because it's Will Ferrell. How can you know?
And interestingly enough, because a lot of people have opinions about Will Ferrell, they love him as a comedian and his very successful films, and some people don't. But here he's stripped down. He's not Will Ferrell pretending. He's the guy that you know that he's friends with.
That's right.
He's not that
Harper.
over the top character that he usually plays.
Exactly. But what's interesting about Will Ferrell too is when he does stuff and he's over the top, he also, to me, he always kind of strips down to the basics.
Yeah, that's true.
You get down to who Will Ferrell is. Even in Anchorman, he has the breakdown. He has I'm just this human. And that's who Will Ferrell is. And what I loved was Kristen Wiig did the song.
Oh, the song was amazing.
Love the song.
I really want that to be best. I think it will be nominated for best song.
That's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought about that because I was crying when I was listening to it. And when at the end of it, as the credits roll, they play this song that was written for the movie, which checks all the boxes to be nominated for best original song, right?
Absolutely.
But it is just done with such heart. But I think that's one of the things that I noticed the most about this documentary is that it is just filled with such true heart. I mean, real genuineness.
Yes.
Not, playing for the camera, not hokiness, not corniness. It is what it is. And what a good documentary, does. But at the same time, it really does illuminate the transgender experience.
Absolutely.
I really loved that portion about they wait for this song. It's the whole time they're checking in with her, the build up to it. And you think the film is ending. It's done. And then the song comes in.
And it makes the film. And that's why
exactly.
there are incredibly exciting songs in Emilia Perez. There are other films that have wonderful scores and such. But the way this is put together and that song coming in, it becomes, the movie is the song. The song is the movie or the documentary. And it is possibly one of the most human experiences I've had on screen in quite some time.
Yeah, me too as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really does.
So.
And like I said, for a lot of people, because it does take people through a journey across our country where sometimes, and particularly in Texas, the transgender experience is very misunderstood and is sometimes malaligned by comments online and sometimes in person. But really, it is a story that helps to share what it is just to be human and and letting people have the freedom to simply be who they want to be and understand that it has nothing to do with you.
That's right. This is their story. And people are telling their story. And now Kristen Wiig, who we adore, is part of helping them tell the story.
Right.
And it's so touching. I do think there could be Oscar gold. At least there will be a major nomination.
Well, I hope so. And also, I forget what an incredible writer Kristen Wiig is, because she's got a real turn of phrase in those songs. And I mean, and it's almost cheeky, but it really has got some real depth to it, too. It's one of those.
That's when Kristen Wiig does everything. She's always, it's cheeky, but at the end, I mean, I'm thinking of the movie she did, was it not Bridesmaids?
Bridesmaids.
Of course, it's Monday. But Bridesmaids, I mean, she is cheeky and funny, but then she becomes extraordinarily human.
Right. And
she becomes extraordinarily vulnerable. And that's Will Ferrell. And that's Will and Harper.
Right.
And the song goes, I get you. I get you. Love is love. And you're going to love your friends.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Well, this has been very nice talking to you, Felipa. But before we go, I would be remiss if we didn't say any other Oscar predictions that you might have up your sleeve. Anything else that maybe isn't necessarily queer, but anything that you see you would like to see get recognized.
Well, The Brutalist is possibly one of the most intense films I've ever seen. 4 hours of fun, not fun. It is overwhelming. It has won every film critic award, the New York Film Critics and so on, and Adrian Brody is over the top. I thought Conclave was brilliant. Ray Fiennes is due his Oscar, but I don't know what's going to happen with The Brutalist. That could be the way it goes. You never know, because some years Hollywood goes wild. A very touching performance and a very touching film is Timothée Chalamet in A Complete Unknown. That is fantastic. My personal choice, of course, for documentary is Will and Harper. I don't know if Emilia Perez, I know she'll be nominated, but I don't know if she's going to take home the Oscar. You never know. The Brutalist is certainly very, very overwhelming, but A Complete Unknown, I'm looking at music also too. Here I go with the arts and music. But I'm going to talk about something very, very quickly, and it's very off the topic because it's extraordinarily independent film. So it's called Ghostlight. And it's about a family in Chicago. And the father works kind of in construction. He's kind of a sad man. And the daughter is a teenager who's got a lot going on, and she's rough and tumble. And the mom is this nice, calm school teacher. And they've had a tragedy in their life. So I don't want to give away too much. And it shows like a little community theater and how they've saved this family. And I've never seen in a film such a great transformative power of the arts like this film called Ghostlight. I think it's streaming. I never saw it showing anywhere, but some of my colleagues with Critics' Choice said, stop everything you're doing and watch Ghostlight. And I did one evening. And it was the most powerful, with unknown actors and independent little film that touched my heart so much. So sadly, it won't win an Oscar.
Right.
But if you ever see Ghostlight, if you see it streaming, if you see it somewhere, stop everything you're doing and watch it, because the arts can transform lives. And that's what all
search
films
for
do.
it. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, that's always nice to have recommendations for films like that fly under the radar. And some of those actually, honestly, there are films, and I think we all walk around with our own baggage and our own set of memories, but there are films that absolutely touch our hearts that stay with us forever.
Yes. And this year, I was like, gosh, why can't that be nominated? Gosh, I just nominated. But then you go, what's the big box office? Well, and you start thinking about all these things. But that's a film, and it's a real film about real people dealing with real issues and how the arts help them.
Well, there you go. We've been talking to Felipa Solis, film critic and Pro Musica executive director and ally extraordinaire. And we appreciate your time, and we wish you a very happy Oscar season, and let's keep watching films.
Let's keep watching, or as I love to quote, see you at the movies.
See you at the movies.
Excellent.
Thank you, Felipa.
Thank you, Felipa.
Well, that was a really interesting talk with Felipa. Did you enjoy yourself?
I did. I was amazed at how much she knew about queer cinema. I wasn't sure that she was going to be so fluent on the topic of it.
Well, and obviously, and she was bringing up references of some of these movies that I'd even forgotten about. For example, The Children's Hour. I mean, that is probably one of the seminal movies about, lesbianism that exists in Hollywood. I mean, it was really amazing. And so I was very pleased to hear her talk about that and how passionate she was about Will and Harper, because we both loved that documentary.
Sure, absolutely. I love that movie. And I'm going to watch it again, our documentary. And I'm still going to watch it once again because there were subtle things that I thought, I want to relive that moment and that kind of thing. But I was so glad that she was so enthused for it and that she backed it up so much.
I agree. And it is really nice to know, because when I asked her to join us in this conversation simply as her role as a film critic. At the time, I had no idea that she was such an ally for the LGBTQIA community. I mean, it really was a nice fit. So I'm very grateful to her. But it did get us thinking about some of the other films that we didn't talk about. So I'm going to ask you now, what film haven't we talked about that really was important to you that was in that genre, the queer genre?
One of my favorites always will be Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Just the costumes alone were brilliant, but the road trip kind of aesthetic of getting yourself out of the safe place that you know and going into the wilderness or into the outback and that kind of thing, taking your queerness out of the safe places, out of the bars, out of the areas that you know, and making a journey that is transformative, and then coming out, you know, brilliant and ebulliently yourself.
Right. And it was such a celebration of queerness. I mean, and it was unapologetic. And I mean, we were putting things in context. I mean, this was the 90s. So when things were, you know, we still had things like The Birdcage and things like that, which, you know, were good films. But this had nothing to do with it. Just started from the very beginning. These people are gay. Some of them are female impersonators or drag queens, and just take a ride with us. And it was unapologetic, and I loved it.
I did too. And also their friendship, the building of their friendships. You know, with gay men, there's always this kind of element of competition, but also an element of brotherhood. Like, you know that you're bound by this one little thing that carries you through. And in the end, you see how much a family they really are.
And it is that brotherhood, but in this particular case, probably more sisterhood, which is wonderful.
Yes.
Well, speaking of sisterhood, my movies, I'll bring up two movies, and I think you're feeling of the third one, but the one that really is, no matter how many times I watch it, it's To Wong Foo, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. That movie, to me, is just a fairy tale in every sense of the word. I mean, you have these three drag queens, again, a very similar story, and not unlike Will and Harper, where, you know, they leave the comfort of their gayness, their gay cities, and they venture off and to sites unknown, to places unknown, and they illuminate the way for other people as they go. And in my particular case, when I saw To Wong Foo, I remember telling my friend Matt, it's like a fairy tale in that these are these three princesses, and they do the princess points and becoming a real drag queen. And so it really is kind of like a little bit of an epic tale of how you kind of come into your own drag queenness, you know?
Yes, and bringing someone else along and showing them the ropes and teaching them how, and paving the way. That,
and also, you know, and sticking up for women, because there was an element of spousal abuse there, and Patrick Swayze's character sticks up for his new friend, and so it works on so many different levels. And the other film that works on so many different levels for me is Victor Victoria, because of the whole idea of it's like a real turning the whole drag story on its ear. And so you have a woman pretending to be a man, pretending to be a woman. And then how, again, very unapologetic, especially at the time in the 80s, about saying these characters are gay, and that's all you need to know about that.
Absolutely. And it was a very nice twist and a fun twist. And watching when his husband's coming home and trying to get brutish with him, and she comes out of the closet and punches him in the face, and you see that camaraderie that we're all together in this. And that's something that I think in all those films you see that coming together, that we stand together.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what we're talking about Will and Harper too. I mean, if there's one thing you learn about that particular film through that film, is the power of friendship, and how even though the person that you're friends with there may be a different aspect to them that you're not familiar with, when there's enough love and friendship there, you are willing to take that ride with somebody.
Yeah, and willing to understand and make room for, you know, this new, my friend is now this, and this is what I'm still going to be there. I'm still that friend for that person. I'm still going to back you up.
Right. So, I mean, we are lucky to live in this era. I mean, even since we had talked about past films that have gotten Oscar attention in recent years, like Moonlight and Call Me by Your Name. And so these films, you know, we're living in an age where we are seeing a lot more visibility. And not every story is gay, not every story is queer. But I think that the ones that are coming out now are a little bit more honest and true to the queer experience. What do you think of that?
Well, I think, yes, they are honest and true to the queer experience. And I do, of course, we want to see ourselves represented correctly, and that's always important. But the other thing that I think is important about the movies that are, updated or that are here at our doorstep now is that they show us triumphant. Usually the movies that were done in years past showed us, always struggling, always
the victim.
The victim.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, always a tragic ending. Now you see the main characters becoming ebullient, becoming themselves and living their life and seeing something great about who they are.
Well, I agree. And it's really interesting to look at that evolution. But, really, we don't have enough time to talk about all the films that we really like. But what we will do is we'll put together our top 10 list of queer films and we'll post it on our website, www.queeronda.com. So, although Ceci did not join us for this episode, for Ceci,
Izzy,
and Ted, we're saying, I gotta know the queers.
We'd love to hear from you. Email us at feedback@queeronda.com or visit our website and leave a comment. www.queeronda.com. That's www.queeronda.com.